History loves to pretend it was logical, like it always read the instructions before starting the experiment. It wore robes, held trials, and spoke Latin confidently, which apparently made every bad decision sound intelligent. But sometimes, history panicked, grabbed a match, and blamed the nearest neighbor with a strange look. Witch burning wasn't superstition. It was fear dressed up as official paperwork with a wax seal. These weren't fairy tales full of broomsticks and spooky chants. They were legal systems, having a very public meltdown and calling it justice. When fear learned how to file paperwork. Witch burning was not born from wild villagers screaming at the moon. It was carefully organized by courts, churches, and city councils that believed chaos could be eliminated with enough fire and competence. Officials in robes and titles convinced themselves that invisible enemies were behind disease, crop failures, political tension, and anything else that made life inconvenient. Accepting uncertainty was far too uncomfortable, so they invented a tidy explanation and gave it a name: witches. Fear, once promoted to official policy, stopped being random and became procedural, complete with hearings, witnesses, and stamped documents. Accusations were written down, debates were held, and executions were scheduled like civic events. Logic wasn't absent. It was simply serving panic. The result was a system where terror wore legality, cruelty passed for order, and paperwork made violence feel responsible. Bamberg and Würzburg. In early 17th century Germany, the prince-bishoprics of Bamberg and Würzburg somehow turned paranoia into an administrative success story. These were not forgotten villages guessing their way through superstition, but wealthy regions run by courts, laws, and well-educated elites who should have known better. Instead, they perfected witch hunting like a civic project, complete with paperwork and purpose-built prisons exclusively for the accused, which really should have raised concerns. Confessions were extracted through torture so relentless it could convince anyone they'd attended Satan's birthday party twice and helped plan the cake. Accusations spread faster than logic, swallowing neighbors, relatives, clergy, and officials alike. Children testified against parents, friends denounced friends, and survival depended largely on timing and luck. Once suspicion became contagious, reason went into quarantine, and entire families vanished while the system congratulated itself on maintaining order. Katharina Henot. Katharina Henot made the fatal mistake of being competent, independent, and slightly too visible in a society that preferred its women quiet and compliant. As a successful postmaster in Cologne, she controlled logistics, money, and information, which earned respect right up until it became threatening. Efficiency, it turns out, looks suspicious when it comes from the wrong person. When rival interests wanted her gone, witchcraft accusations proved far faster and cleaner than political maneuvering. There was no evidence beyond gossip, bruised egos, and professional jealousy, yet that was more than enough. Under torture, she confessed to crimes so absurd they sounded like satire written under duress. Her execution served as a warning disguised as justice, proving that witch trials were never really about spells or demons, but about removing people who didn't stay neatly in their assigned boxes. Anna Göldi. By the late 18th century, Europe proudly claimed it had discovered reason, science, and Enlightenment thinking. Right up until panic knocked on the door. Anna Göldi was executed in Switzerland in 1782, earning the grim distinction of being remembered as Europe's last witch trial victim, a title no one should ever win. Authorities, embarrassed by the optics, avoided the word witch entirely and charged her with poisoning through supernatural means, which is essentially witchcraft in a fake mustache. The case was powered by social hierarchy, a servant accused of harming her employer's child, a storyteller made for public outrage. Evidence was thin, logic was optional, and fear did the heavy lifting. The trial showed how superstition doesn't disappear, it rebrands. Göldi's death revealed that society hadn't abandoned its fears. It had simply updated the language to sound more respectable. The Salem process. In 1692, paranoia packed its bags, crossed the Atlantic, and settled comfortably in colonial Massachusetts. The Salem trials weren't the result of medieval ignorance, but of stress, rigid religious beliefs, political tension, and a community already suspicious of itself. A group of young girls claimed to be possessed, adults panicked, And instead of questioning the situation, the legal system leaned in enthusiastically. Courts accepted spectral evidence, meaning dreams, visions, and invisible accusations, as legitimate proof, which tells you exactly how flexible reality had become. Accusations spread faster than facts, and denial was treated as confirmation of guilt. Neighbors turned on neighbors, faith replaced logic, and fear became contagious. Reason eventually returned, but not before 20 people were executed and many more imprisoned. The colony later apologized, quietly and awkwardly, after realizing that panic is decisive, dramatic, and extremely bad at admitting mistakes. Why women were the perfect targets? Most accused witches were women, not because women practiced more magic, but because they practiced independence in a world that found that deeply unsettling. Widows, healers, outspoken wives, and unmarried women were automatically suspicious, simply for existing outside neat social expectations. Any woman who owned property, spoke her mind in public, or survived without male supervision was quietly labeled a problem. Witch trials offered a convenient solution by reframing independence as danger. Under the comforting illusion of moral cleansing, society punished deviation while pretending it was protection. The real crime wasn't sorcery, but refusing to be small, silent, and easy to control. Torture, confessions, and the illusion of truth. Confessions were treated as unquestionable proof, even though the methods used to obtain them made accuracy impossible from the start. Victims were stretched, crushed, deprived of sleep, or threatened until imagination quietly replaced memory and survival took over. Under that pressure, people confessed to flying, shape-shifting, and attending demonic meetings because fantasy hurt less than reality. Courts eagerly accepted these stories, mistaking endurance for honesty and pain for truth. Each confession validated the next arrest, and each arrest demanded another confession. The system fed itself, rewarding cruelty with certainty. While logic wasn't missing at all, it was simply aimed in the wrong direction and applauded for its confidence. The slow realization that this was a terrible idea. Witch trials didn't end because society suddenly discovered compassion or moral clarity. They ended because the whole operation became awkward, expensive, and politically inconvenient. Governments noticed that executing productive citizens was terrible for the economy, and even worse for public image. Legal thinkers reluctantly admitted that torture produced creative stories, not reliable truth. Religious leaders quietly stepped back once belief started looking like embarrassment. In Salem, courts issued apologies and compensation. Gestures history mostly files under far too late. Reason didn't arrive with a heroic speech, it slipped in quietly, hoping no one would ask why it took so long. What witch burning really tells us about power. At its core, witch burning was never about magic, but about control dressed up as public safety. It offered simple answers to complex problems and let authorities look decisive without doing the hard work of real solutions. Blame was easier than reform, and fire was much faster than reflection. The trials turned fear into a governing tool and obedience into a survival strategy. Once panic was rewarded, it multiplied. Once dissent was punished, it vanished. When systems stop questioning themselves, they don't become stable. They start inventing enemies to justify their own power. The uncomfortable legacy that refuses to stay buried. Witch hunts didn't disappear when the fires went out. They simply learned to change outfits. The language softened, the methods modernized, but the pattern stayed the same. Panic, accusation, moral certainty, and punishment. History's most uncomfortable lesson isn't that people once believed in witches, but that intelligent societies repeatedly convinced themselves that cruelty was justice. The targets changed, but the logic didn't. Fear still loves a simple villain, and power still enjoys the applause that comes with protecting everyone. The flames are gone, yet the mindset keeps flickering, waiting for the next moment when fear feels easier than thinking. If this story made you uncomfortable, good. That's history doing its job. Fear doesn't stay in the past, it just changes names. If you want more stories that expose how power really works, don't forget to like and subscribe, and keep questioning what looks normal. Because silence has never protected anyone.